Why do some people choose to stand alone instead of following the crowd? Have you ever felt out of place, like you just didn't fit in? Ever been labeled weird for seeing the world differently? Nature has a theory about this. It sees society like a herd of sheep, and some people are born to be the black sheep. They unsettle others simply by being themselves. But is this a curse or a hidden gift? Today, we'll explore why those who think differently often find themselves alone, and why that solitude might actually be their greatest strength. Picture a field full of white sheep. They all eat the same grass, move together, follow the same shepherd. Then, a black sheep appears. She hasn't done anything wrong, but immediately, the other sheep stop and stare. Why is she different? Why isn't she like us? Nature viewed society the same way. For most, life is a giant herd moving in unison. Same rules, same thoughts, same goals. The house, the job, the family, the retirement, all at the same pace, heading in the same direction. But when someone comes along who questions the rules, who thinks differently, who seeks another path, the herd grows uneasy. The problem isn't what the different person does, it's what she represents. She shows that there's another way to live, and that scares those who chose the safety of the group. If one sheep can leave the herd and survive, then the others didn't need to stay there. But they stayed out of fear, out of comfort, because they didn't know they had a choice. The black sheep is an uncomfortable mirror. She reflects lost opportunities, abandoned dreams, conformities accepted without question. That's why the herd prefers that she leaves. Not out of malice, but out of emotional self-preservation. It's easier to pretend that there's only one way to live. But leaving the herd comes at a high price, a very high price. Those who decide to think with their own head lose many things they once had guaranteed. They lose the feeling of belonging, of being accepted, of being safe in the middle of the group. They trade collective certainty for individual doubt. They trade comfort for freedom. The herd offers something very valuable: the illusion that you'll never be alone. There will always be someone to validate your choices, to share your anxieties, to confirm that you're on the right path. When you leave this protection, you need to learn to deal with silence. No one will applaud your decisions anymore. No one will tell you that you're doing well. Loneliness becomes your constant companion. Not the loneliness of someone who is physically alone, but the loneliness of someone who thinks alone, of someone who creates their own answers, of someone who builds their own morality. It's a deep loneliness because it touches the essence of who you are. You can no longer rely on what everyone thinks. You need to discover what you think. This is the most frightening freedom that exists. The freedom to be completely responsible for yourself without excuses, without crutches, without the protection of the group. And many people prefer to give up this freedom. They prefer to continue being white sheep rather than face the price of being a black sheep. Black sheep carry an invisible but heavy stigma. They're seen as problematic, rebellious, difficult to deal with, not because they harm anyone, but because their mere existence questions the rules of the game. They show that it's possible to live outside established norms, and that deeply bothers those who chose to follow these norms. Society's gaze upon those who are different is merciless. First comes curiosity, then distrust, finally rejection. People start to whisper, make comments, create theories about why you don't fit in. You don't follow the family's religion. You must have problems. You don't want to get married. That's weird. You don't care about status. You have no ambition. Exclusion comes in subtle but constant ways. You stop being invited to certain meetings. Your opinions are heard with a forced smile. People talk to you as if you were an exotic animal in the zoo. Interesting from afar, but better to keep your distance. Social isolation becomes an inevitable reality. But perhaps the most painful thing is realizing that people you loved, whom you considered close, also start to drift away. Family members who don't understand your choices, friends who feel judged by your difference, colleagues who prefer the company of those who think alike. The social circle narrows until almost no one remains. Marginalization isn't always explicit. Sometimes it comes disguised as concern. Are you sure? Wouldn't it be better to follow what's normal? What if you regret it? People try to bring you back to the herd, convinced they're doing you a favor. They can't imagine that someone could be happy outside of what they consider normal. Sustaining your own identity in a society that values uniformity requires special courage. You need to wake up every day and choose to be yourself, knowing this will generate discomfort, knowing it would be easier to pretend, to adapt, to go with the flow. But once you've tasted the freedom of thinking for yourself, going back becomes almost impossible. The courage not to belong isn't heroism, it's necessity. When you discover that the herd's rules don't make sense to you, when you realize that following the crowd is killing something inside you, the choice becomes inevitable. Either you live other people's lives or you live your own life. There's no middle ground. This courage exacts a high price in isolation. You learn to celebrate your victories alone because few people will understand what they mean. You learn to face your defeats alone because your struggles are different from others' struggles. You learn that being part of the crowd was simpler, but that being authentic is more honest. Isolation becomes inevitable because you and the herd start living in different worlds. They have their priorities, their fears, their standardized dreams. You have yours. Unique, personal, incomprehensible to those who never left the collective comfort zone. Communication becomes difficult. Interests drift apart. The separation happens naturally. But here's something nature perceived that few people see. Herd morality didn't arise by chance. It was created specifically to protect mediocrity, to make everyone feel comfortable being mediocre, to ensure that no one stands out too much because that would make others feel small. Society created rules that prevent individual greatness. Be humble. Don't think you're something special. Everyone is equal. These pretty phrases hide a cruel truth. They serve to keep everyone at the same low level. If no one can stand out, no one needs to strive to grow. If everyone is equal, no one needs to face their own mediocrity. Collective morality is actually the morality of laziness. It's easier to create rules that prevent people from shining than to strive to shine as well. It's more comfortable to criticize those who stand out than to work to stand out yourself. Society prefers to level down rather than accept that some people are really different, really special. NZE called this slave morality, a morality created by weak people to protect themselves from strong people, a morality that turned virtues into defects and defects into virtues. Being ambitious became greed. Being confident became arrogance. Being different became a problem. Society inverted values to protect those who didn't want to develop. This collective morality works like an invisible prison. It limits human potential, clips the wings of those who could fly higher, keeps everyone crawling at the same level. And the worst part, it convinces people that this limitation is virtue, that being mediocre is being good, that not standing out is being humble, that staying in the comfort zone is being wise. But when you manage to escape this moral prison, when you break the chains of conformity, something extraordinary happens. You discover that loneliness isn't just pain, it's also a sacred space of self-knowledge, a laboratory where you can experiment with being who you really are without judgments, without pressures, without others' expectations. In solitude, you don't need to wear masks. You don't need to play a role to please anyone. You can explore your deepest thoughts, your truest emotions, your most authentic desires. Solitude becomes a clean mirror where you can finally see yourself without distortions. It's in this fertile isolation that your true voice is born, not the voice that imitates others, not the voice that repeats what you learned, but the unique voice that only you can have. A voice that emerges from your deepest center, that expresses your essence without filters, that says things only you could say.
The self-knowledge that comes from solitude is different from any other. It doesn't come from books. It doesn't come from therapy. It doesn't come from conversations with friends. It comes from silence, from time alone with yourself, from direct confrontation with who you are. When no one is watching, when no one is judging, when no one expects anything from you. Many people flee from solitude because they're afraid of what they'll find there. They're afraid to discover they're different from what they imagined. They're afraid to face their shadows, their contradictions, their less noble parts. But those who have the courage to dive into this solitude discover treasures they never imagined possessing. Solitude reveals hidden talents, forgotten passions, buried dreams. It cleans the mind of social pollution, of external noise, of influences that prevent us from hearing our own inner voice. It's as if you finally managed to tune into your particular frequency, after years of hearing only the collective frequency. But this discovery has a high emotional price. When you develop your unique voice, when you find your personal truth, you realize that few people will be able to truly understand you. Your ideas sound strange to those who never questioned their own. Your dreams seem impossible to those who gave up their own dreams. The anguish of not being understood is one of the deepest experiences that exist. It's different from physical pain, which passes. It's different from the pain of loss, which heals. It's a constant melancholy that accompanies you every day because you realize you live in a world that doesn't speak your language, that doesn't understand your values, that doesn't share your priorities. You try to explain your ideas, but people look as if you were speaking in code. You share your discoveries but receive polite smiles and subject changes. You show your art, your creation, your unique contribution, but encounter indifference or incomprehension. The echo you expected doesn't come. Your words get lost in the void. This lack of reciprocity slowly corrodes the soul. You start to doubt whether it's worth continuing to be authentic, if that means living misunderstood. You start to wonder if it wouldn't be better to go back to speaking the language of collectivity, even if that meant betraying your own essence. The temptation of conformity whispers promises of acceptance and understanding. The emotional weight of living without echo in society is immense. You carry your truths like heavy stones because you have no one to share them with. Your joys are cut in half because there's no one who really understands why you're happy. Your sadnesses multiply because you need to face them in seclusion without the comfort of someone who understands what you're going through. But perhaps the most painful thing is realizing that this incomprehension isn't temporary. It's not something that will improve with time. It's not a phase that will pass. It's the permanent condition of those who chose to think differently. It's the inevitable destiny of those who developed a unique perspective on life. And here we arrive at the great dilemma that nature posed. Radical freedom brings with it the inevitable burden of isolation. You can't have one without the other. There's no middle ground. Either you live safely in the crowd, accepted but limited, or you live free in isolation, authentic but lonely. True freedom isn't the freedom that society offers. It's not the freedom to choose between predefined options, to follow paths already traced by others. It's the freedom to create your own paths, to define your own values, to build your own version of what it means to live well. And this freedom scares even those who desire it. When you're truly free, you no longer have excuses for your choices. You can no longer blame society, family, circumstances. You're the only one responsible for your life. This is terrifying and liberating at the same time. You gain total power over your destiny, but lose all the emotional crutches that supported you. Radical freedom requires that you be strong enough to carry the weight of your own decisions, that you be brave enough to face the consequences of being different, that you be resilient enough to withstand the incomprehension and loneliness that come with authenticity. That's why many people, even when they have the opportunity to be free, prefer to return to the safety of collectivity. They prefer to trade authenticity for acceptance, freedom for security, individual intensity for collective tranquility. It's an understandable choice that has its own logic. You'll never know who you could have been if you'd had the courage to be different. But you also avoid the emotional costs of that journey. The dilemma is real and has no easy answer. Is it better to live a stable but accompanied life or an authentic but lonely life? Is it better to be a white sheep integrated into the group or a black sheep free but isolated? Each person needs to answer this question for themselves, considering their own nature and capacity to bear the costs of each choice. But one thing nature made very clear. Those who choose freedom and bear the loneliness that comes with it can develop a creative force impossible to find in the herd. It's in marginality, in isolation, in difference that the ideas that change the world are born. It's outside the group that innovations emerge that transform society. History is full of examples of people who were rejected in their time and only understood later. Misunderstood artists who created revolutionary works, ridiculed scientists who discovered fundamental truths, marginalized philosophers who developed ideas that changed our way of thinking about life. Van Gogh sold only one canvas during his lifetime, but today his works are worth millions. Galileo was condemned by the church, but his discoveries changed our understanding of the universe. Darwin was attacked for his theory, but it became the foundation of modern biology. Nature died mad and misunderstood, but influenced generations of thinkers. They all paid the price of loneliness, incomprehension, rejection. But it was exactly this position as outsiders that gave them the unique perspective necessary to create something truly new. They weren't trapped by the prejudices of their time, by the limitations of their society, by the expectations of their social group. The solitary person develops an observation capacity that the herd doesn't possess. He sees society from the outside with detachment, without being emotionally invested in defending its norms. This gives him a clarity of vision impossible to have when you're in the middle of the crowd following its movements, sharing its illusions. It's from this privileged position of external observer that the solitary person's creative force is born. He doesn't need to conform to existing solutions because he's not committed to them. He can question everything, experiment with new paths, invent alternatives that no one had thought of before. The solitary person becomes an inventor of values, a creator of possibilities, a pioneer of unexplored territories. He's not limited by what everyone thinks is possible, by what everyone thinks is right, by what everyone believes is normal. His freedom of thought is total, and from this freedom, unique contributions to the world are born. But this creative force has a price. Direct confrontation with existential emptiness. When you distance yourself from collective certainties, when you question established values, when you refuse society's ready-made answers, you come face to face with nothingness, with the absence of guaranteed meaning, of predefined purpose, of clear direction. This confrontation with emptiness can be devastating. It's what nature called nihilism, the discovery that there's no intrinsic meaning in life, that all values are human constructions, that there are no absolute truths to guide us. Many people can't bear this revelation and prefer to run back to the herd's comforting illusions. Nihilism can destroy those who aren't prepared for it. It can lead to despair, depression, the feeling that nothing is worthwhile if nothing has guaranteed meaning. Many great thinkers were consumed by this discovery, lost themselves in the void, never managed to find a way out of the labyrinth of meaninglessness. But for those who have enough strength to cross this existential desert, nihilism can be liberating. If there are no absolute values, you can create your own values. If there's no guaranteed meaning, you can build your own meaning. If there's no predefined purpose, you can invent your own purpose. Existential isolation then becomes not a curse, but an opportunity. The opportunity to be the architect of your own existence, the author of your own story, the creator of your own universe of values. It's a frightening freedom, but also a grandiose responsibility. You become responsible for giving meaning to your own life. This crossing through the void isn't easy or quick. It requires time, patience, courage to bear uncertainty. Many give up halfway, preferring to accept borrowed meanings, second-hand values, purposes defined by others. But those who manage to complete the crossing emerge transformed, strengthened, truly free. And it's from this solitary crossing that what nature called the Übermensch, the overman, can be born. Not a superhero, not a perfect being, but someone who managed to overcome the limitations imposed by herd morality and create a new form of existence. Someone who developed their own values, their own meaning, their own strength. The Übermensch isn't better than others in the traditional moral sense. He's different. He operated an internal transformation so deep that he can no longer be measured by conventional standards. He created his own metric of greatness, his own definition of success, his own version of what it means to live well. But to reach this state of transformation, you first need to completely bear loneliness. There are no shortcuts, no easier ways. Loneliness is the entry price for transformation. The fee you pay to have access to the unexplored territories of yourself. Those who can't pay this price stay outside, limited to the possibilities that society offers. Bearing loneliness means accepting that you'll spend a lot of time alone with your thoughts, your doubts, your anxieties. It means learning to be your own company, your own counselor, your own judge. It means developing an intimate and honest relationship with yourself, without the social distractions that normally prevent us from truly knowing ourselves. It's a painful process because you'll discover things about yourself that you'd rather not know. You'll find fears you didn't know you had, desires you didn't admit to possessing, contradictions you preferred to ignore. But it's also a transformative process because only by completely knowing your shadows can you integrate and overcome them. Only those who completely cross isolation can create new horizons. Because new horizons aren't born from collective consensus, don't emerge from democratic decisions, aren't products of group brainstorming. They're born from the unique vision of someone who managed to position themselves outside existing patterns and see possibilities that no one else saw. The new horizons created by solitaries eventually benefit all of society. The ideas they developed in solitude, the discoveries they made in isolation, the creations that were born from their difference, end up being adopted by the herd. But this only happens much later when these ideas have already been tested, validated, domesticated. Meanwhile, the creator remains misunderstood, marginalized, isolated. He plants seeds that will only germinate in future generations. He works for a world he may never get to know. His reward doesn't come from immediate recognition, but from the intimate satisfaction of having been faithful to himself and having contributed something unique to existence. But society doesn't passively accept the existence of black sheep. It has powerful mechanisms to deal with those who threaten its stability, who question its norms, who show that there's another way to live. And these mechanisms are more sophisticated and cruel than they seem at first glance. The collective acts against the singular in a systematic and relentless way. First, it tries to bring him back through persuasion, advice, apparently sincere concern. If that doesn't work, it moves to social pressure, gradual isolation, withdrawal of support, and opportunities. When pressure doesn't resolve, it comes direct attack, ridicule, diminishment, attempts to destroy the credibility of those who dare to be different. He thinks he's better than everyone. She's acting special. Who does he think he is? Society uses its most powerful weapon, collective shame. Ridicule is a very efficient form of psychological violence. It transforms difference into reason for humiliation, authenticity into reason for mockery, the courage to be unique into source of embarrassment. Many people give up being themselves just to escape social ridicule. When ridicule isn't enough, society moves to more systematic attack. It questions the mental sanity of those who think differently, suggests the person has psychological problems, insinuates that difference is actually illness. It's a way of pathologizing singularity, of transforming health into abnormality. If not even that works, comes the last resort, forced invisibility. Society simply ignores those who insist on being different. It doesn't invite anymore, doesn't include anymore, doesn't recognize anymore. It's as if the person stopped existing socially. A civil death that can be crueler than physical death. This exclusion mechanism works as herd defense. It protects the majority from the destabilization that difference can cause. It keeps everyone in line, following the same rules, believing the same things. It's a very efficient social control system, operating without most people realizing they're participating in it. The cruelest thing is that this system convinces even its victims that they are the ones who are wrong. That the problem isn't society's inability to deal with difference, but the stubbornness of those who insist on being different. The victim becomes guilty, the aggressor becomes victim, and reality is completely inverted. But black sheep develop over time a particular form of resistance. Not a noisy resistance, not an explicit rebellion, but a silent and constant refusal to submit to social pressures. They simply continue being themselves despite everything against all evidence that it would be easier to conform. This silent rebellion is more powerful than it seems. It doesn't give ammunition for society's attacks, doesn't offer easy targets for ridicule. It's simply the quiet persistence of those who know who they are and do not need to prove anything to anyone. A form of existential protest that can't be easily combed. Silence becomes a declaration. The refusal to participate in social games becomes a critique of the games themselves. Chosen isolation becomes a demonstration that it's possible to live outside established rules. It's a way of teaching by example, even when no one seems to be paying attention. This silent resistance bothers society more than any direct confrontation because it can't be easily disqualified, can't be labeled as aggressive or problematic. It's simply someone living differently. And that by itself is already a powerful critique of how everyone lives. The black sheep who silently resists becomes a constant mirror for those who chose conformity. Her mere existence reminds everyone every day that there's another way to live, that choices that seem inevitable are actually optional, that the life that seems unique is actually just one possibility among many. That's why society insists so much on bringing them back, not out of genuine concern, but out of need for validation. If the black sheep returns to the herd, that proves the herd was right. If she continues resisting, that keeps alive the uncomfortable possibility that the herd might be wrong. But there's a constant temptation in the life of those who chose to be different, the temptation to return. When loneliness tightens, when isolation hurts, when incomprehension becomes unbearable, the idea of conforming to relieve the pain becomes very attractive. It would be so easy to put on a mask, follow the rules, pretend you think like others. The danger of returning to the herd is real and constant. It whispers seductive promises. You can be happy here. Everyone will accept you. It doesn't need to be so difficult. Why complicate life? And when you're exhausted from the struggle, when loneliness weighs too much, these promises sound like salvation. Many black sheep succumb to this temptation and return to the herd. They put a white cape over their black skin and pretend they're like the others. They gain acceptance, conquer security, recover the feeling of belonging, but they pay a high price, their own authenticity. Those who return to the herd after having experienced freedom are left in a particularly painful position because they know they're pretending. They know they could be different. They know they're betraying something fundamental in themselves. The acceptance they so desired becomes bitter when it comes at the price of their own identity. The risk is permanently losing the capacity to be authentic. When you spend too much time pretending to be another person, you can start to forget who you really are. The mask sticks to your face. The character becomes reality. The performance replaces true life. You gain social acceptance, but lose yourself. This happens gradually, almost imperceptibly. First, you pretend to agree with some things. Then, you start acting as if you really agreed. Finally, you begin to believe you really agree. The line between what you are and what you're representing dissolves, and you can no longer distinguish between your true identity and your social persona. Many people live their entire lives like this, being a domesticated version of who they could have been, a socially acceptable version of their original essence. They conquer success, approval, stability, but deep down, in a part they rarely dare to examine, they know something fundamental was lost. The danger of returning to the herd is exactly this. It's not just a change in behavior, it's a betrayal of your own soul. It's the conscious choice to be smaller than you could be, to accept a limited life in exchange for a safe life. And once this choice is made, going back becomes increasingly difficult. That's why nature insisted so much on the courage necessary to remain different. It's not just the initial courage to leave the herd, but the daily courage not to return. The courage to bear loneliness, incomprehension, isolation, the courage to prefer painful truth to comfortable lie. But there's something that makes all this struggle more complex and in a certain way more beautiful. It's that the isolation of black sheep, when completely accepted, when it's no longer seen as punishment but as privilege, reveals a dimension that few people can access. Solitude can become not just a burden, but a gift. Not everyone can bear prolonged seclusion. Most people need constant company, regular validation, external noise to feel alive. They flee from silence, fill life with distractions, do anything to avoid being alone with themselves. Isolation for them is pure terror. But for those who develop the capacity to inhabit introspection, it transforms into a sacred space of infinite possibilities. It's there in that fertile silence that the most original ideas are born. the most authentic creations, the deepest insights about life and about oneself. Solitude as privilege is chosen solitude, not imposed solitude. It's when you realize you prefer your own company to the company of most people. When you discover that your thoughts are more interesting than most conversations. When you understand that silence says more than most words. This transformation of solitude into privilege doesn't happen automatically. You need to learn to inhabit it, to coexist with it, to extract from it everything it can offer. You need to discover that you're interesting company for yourself, that your mind is a rich territory to explore, that your imagination is an inexhaustible universe of possibilities. When this happens, solitude stops being empty and becomes generative. It produces art, philosophy, discoveries, inventions. It's the laboratory where the most risky experiments can be made, where the boldest hypotheses can be tested, where the most personal truths can be faced. It's in this space that true creation and true freedom emerge. Freedom not just from social pressures, but from the compulsive need for approval, company, external validation. You become complete in yourself, emotionally self-sufficient, capable of generating your own meaning and your own joy. This doesn't mean you no longer value other people, or that you no longer need anyone. It means you're no longer desperate for company. You no longer accept just any relationship just to not be alone. You no longer submit to groups that don't respect who you are. Your relationships become conscious choices, not compulsive necessities. Solitude as privilege is therefore a conquest. It's the result of a long process of emotional and spiritual maturation. It's when you finally made peace with your difference, when you stopped fighting against it and started celebrating it. It's when your singularity stops being a problem and becomes your greatest strength. But even this transformation has its shadowy aspects. The burden of always walking alone never completely disappears. Even when you learn to value your solitude, even when you discover the potentials it offers, there are still moments of weight, of tiredness, of questioning whether it was worth having chosen this path. There's a deep pain in carrying visions that no one shares, insights that no one understands, discoveries that no one values. It's like having treasures that only you can see the value of, like speaking a language that only you comprehend, like inhabiting a world that only you know. The inner wealth can be immense, but communicative solitude remains. The inner greatness you develop in solitude is real, but it's also invisible to most people. You may have discovered deep truths about existence, developed unique wisdom about life, created works of beauty and meaning. But if no one recognizes or comprehends these conquests, they remain like buried treasures. There's something heroic and tragic at the same time about being a black sheep. Heroic because you chose truth over comfort, authenticity over acceptance, freedom over security. Tragic because this choice inevitably leads to isolation, incomprehension, existential loneliness. The heroic aspect is in the courage to sustain your own identity in a world that prefers uniformity. In resisting the most powerful social pressures, in choosing to be faithful to yourself, even when it costs dearly. In keeping alive the flame of difference in a world that tries to extinguish it. The tragic aspect is in the emotional price of this choice, in the constant pain of not belonging, in the anguish of not being understood, in the melancholy of carrying alone discoveries that could benefit others if they could understand them, in the sadness of seeing the world losing growth opportunities because it can't accept difference. But maybe it's exactly this combination of heroism and tragedy that marks truly elevated spirits. They're not people who chose an easy path and triumphed. They're people who chose the most difficult path and paid the price for this choice. Their greatness doesn't come from social success, but from the courage to be authentic despite all difficulties. Being alone is at the same time burden and distinctive mark of those who surpass the limits imposed by society. It's the price paid for having access to territories of human experience that most people will never know. It's the entrance fee to levels of consciousness and creativity that can only be reached outside collective patterns. The distinctive mark isn't externally visible. It doesn't come with trophies, diplomas, or official recognitions. It's an internal mark that you carry in your soul that manifests in the way you see the world, how you face challenges, how you create solutions to problems that others don't even perceive exist. This mark differentiates you not just from others, but also from who you were before embarking on this journey of self-discovery. You become an improved version of yourself, more complete, more conscious, more free. You develop capacities and perceptions you didn't know you possessed. Here we arrive at the central point of nature's philosophy about black sheep. Solitude isn't a tragic accident in the life of those who think differently. It's the inevitable destiny, the necessary condition, the natural territory of those who manage to surpass the limitations imposed by the herd. It's not possible to remain authentic in a society that values conformity and at the same time remain integrated into that society. These two conditions are mutually exclusive. Either you adapt to collective expectations and lose your authenticity, or you maintain your authenticity and accept the isolation that comes with it. Nature saw this not as an unfortunate choice, but as a natural law of human existence. Just as certain plants only flourish at high altitudes far from sea level, certain human qualities only develop in solitude far from social pressure. Individual greatness and social integration are incompatible. This doesn't mean that black sheep are superior to white sheep in some absolute moral sense. Both paths have their costs and benefits. It just means they're different, that they operate on a different frequency, that they have distinct needs and capacities. They didn't choose to be different. They discovered they were different and had to learn to deal with the consequences of this discovery. The destiny of black sheep is to always walk on the margin, always observing from outside, always questioning what many accept as truth. It's an existence rich in internal discoveries and limited in external recognition. It's a life of elevated intensity and deep introspection, with its moments of singular beauty and its periods of inevitable melancholy. But nature made a call to courage for those who recognize themselves in this description. He said, if you discovered you're a black sheep, if you realized you can't conform to the standardized life that society offers, if you feel there's something in you that demands unique expression, then have courage to bear the crossing of solitude. Don't flee from it. Don't fight against it. Don't try to soften it by returning to the herd. Accept it as an integral part of who you are. Learn to inhabit it, to extract from it its creative potentials, to transform it into fuel for your personal evolution. Use solitude as a laboratory to discover what you're really capable of. The courage nature asked for wasn't the courage of a moment, but the courage of a lifetime. The courage to wake up every day and choose to be authentic, even knowing this, will generate incomprehension. The courage to create even knowing few will understand your creation. The courage to love truth more than popularity. This courage isn't natural. It needs to be cultivated daily. It needs to be renewed constantly, because pressures to conform never cease. Society never stops trying to bring black sheep back to the herd. The temptation to give up authenticity in exchange for acceptance is permanent. But for those who can sustain this courage, for those who can completely cross solitude without giving up on themselves, nature promised a reward. The possibility of becoming who you really are, of completely developing your unique potential, of contributing something truly original to human existence. The crossing of solitude is therefore not just the destiny of black sheep, but also their opportunity for transformation. It's the path through which they can discover and develop qualities that would remain dormant if they had chosen the safety of the herd. And in the end, when the crossing is complete, when solitude has been totally accepted and integrated, something new emerges, a form of existing that no longer needs others' approval to validate itself, that no longer depends on external references to orient itself, that created its own values and its own measure of greatness. This is nature's promise to black sheep. If you have the courage to completely bear the solitude that is part of you, if you don't try to escape it or soften it with conformity, you'll discover possibilities of existence that most people never imagined could exist. Solitude stops being punishment and becomes conquest. Isolation stops being problem and becomes privilege. Difference stops being defect and becomes strength. And you discover that the price of authenticity, however high it may be, is worth more than all the benefits of conformity. In the end, being a black sheep isn't a curse that was imposed on you. It's a destiny you chose when you decided to be faithful to who you really are. And the solitude that comes with this choice isn't empty. It's full of possibilities that only you can realize. If you recognized yourself in this description, If you realized you're also a black sheep trying to find your place in a world of white sheep, don't be afraid of the journey that awaits you. Solitude can be heavy, but it can also be the space where you finally find your true strength. And comment below, I am a black sheep.